The future of digital transformation and capital-intensive industries, Microsoft's huge AI investment in the UAE, and the top 10 enterprise systems for 2026. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 248 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 248. My name is Eric Kimberling, CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and this podcast has everything to do with the tech-agnostic side of digital transformation. We cover people, process, technology, and strategy. And joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I'm excited for another episode.
Yes, a fun one here today. Lots of futuristic, forward-looking stuff. I feel like we're always fairly futuristic, but today we're really getting into it. We're going to talk about some social media questions from the audience. And we're going to talk about a couple really interesting newsworthy topics. We're going to talk about how Microsoft is shipping 60,000 NVIDIA AI chips to the UAE. We'll talk about why India's tech pay slump matters to global IT leaders. And then later in the show, we'll have the CEO of a company called IFS Software. If you're familiar with them, they're a big ERP and AI software provider. We'll have Mark Moffat on the show, who's the CEO of that company. We'll talk about the future of digital transformation and capital-intensive industries. And then last but not least, later in the show, we will present to you our top 10 countdown of the top 10 enterprise systems for 2026. And this is a really interesting top 10 list. They always are, because it always sparks a lot of conversation and in many cases controversy. And if you're not number one, then you hate the list. If you're a vendor and if you're a buyer, you wonder if this top 10 list applies to every scenario. And the answer to that is no, it doesn't apply to every scenario. But what's really interesting about this top 10 list is we're looking very broadly at not just ERP, not just CRM or HR tech. We're looking at enterprise apps, enterprise tech in general. So it sort of jumbled the top 10 ranking compared to past years, because in the past we would put things in more of a box. You know, here's the top 10 ERP systems, here's the top 10 CRM systems, et cetera. But this is the first time we've done it all. Just these are the top 10 enterprise technologies, platforms, apps, et cetera, et cetera. So stay tuned for that. We'll get to that and have some conversation around that. But before we get to all this good stuff we're going to get to here today, Darian, what are some of the recent questions we've received from our audience on social media?
Yeah, a couple good questions today. This first one is about the list, actually, that you were talking about. And it says, completely agree, but I would say the bigger question for 2026 is, can enterprises move from buying technologies to building intelligence?
Ooh, that's a good question. From buying technologies to building intelligence. Well, I think it's a good question. I've never been asked that or anything like that. The technology, I think, provides you a tool set to build the intelligence. But I guess more my mind goes is, can we build the intelligence in our organizations to not screw up the technology implementations that would allow us to become more intelligent? So that's the tricky chicken and eggs problem I think a lot of organizations have, is the technology. Absolutely, you probably need better technologies or technology enhancements to fully become a truly independent or a truly intelligent organization, but you need a certain level of intelligence to not screw it up along the way. So I think if you can focus on building intelligence in how you deploy technology, so you're not one of the 80% that fail in your technology deployments, and actually that number is going up with AI initiatives. That number has been as high as 95% in some studies that show that 95% of AI initiatives are failing. So that number is arguably creeping up from the historic 80% level of failure rate. So I think the good news is it doesn't take a massive amount of genius intelligence to become successful in these projects. There's some common sense things you can do to improve. And that's, of course, a big part of what we talk about throughout this podcast.
There was another question here that I want to talk about as well. It came from one of your videos on LinkedIn, and it says, does that mean the sales quota is the root cause of the problem? I hardly know growing companies without sales quotas. And I would assume this question is towards like vendors.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I know which video that's referring to. I was referring to one thing I commonly talk about is the economic self-interest that can lead from vendors that can lead to trouble or problems for their customers unintentionally. And so I'll call it out not to bash vendors and say you shouldn't try to sell, you shouldn't be aggressive, you shouldn't set quotas. Of course, you need to do that. My message is more for the buyers of those technologies to say you need to recognize that if I'm trying to sell you something and I'm pushing hard and showing you all the good stuff, that's great. Take that into consideration, but get your own objective view of what the dark side is. What are the downside risks? Just like, when you go to Amazon or to any website and you buy something, in most cases, you have the option to go look at customer reviews. So I can go look at the customer reviews and see that, okay, it's not perfect. Some people like it, some people don't, or most people like most of this product, but there's certain things they don't like about it. And I need to know that stuff to be satisfied with what I'm going to buy and to feel like I've done my due diligence. And the same is true for enterprise tech. If I'm going to, buy a $50 shirt off Amazon and I can go read reviews, if I'm going to spend $50 million on a enterprise technology deployment, I probably should do something similar, maybe spend a little bit more due diligence than I would on buying a $50 shirt. So I think that's the way to look at it, is just making sure that you recognize that people are out to sell. Some of these vendors are driven very aggressively by investors to build up their cloud subscription revenue and also to build up their AI capabilities. So those are the two levers that investors are really rewarding software vendors for. So that trickles down to the sales reps who are compensated heavily to push cloud, to push AI, all that stuff. And again, nothing wrong with that. That's just the way the world works. But you as a buyer just need to recognize you're going to get the rose-colored glasses version of their solution offering. You need to know what the real version of their offering is, not just in terms of the capabilities of the software, but more importantly, what it's going to take to deploy that software successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great questions, though, from the audience on all of the social media platforms. But I want to switch gears and get into our first newsworthy article of the day, which is about Microsoft. So Microsoft's latest move kind of blends AI scale with geopolitics. A massive GPU export to the UAE under the US oversight. So that's what we're going to be talking about. What happened was Microsoft will ship 60,000 NVIDIA AI chips to data centers in the UAE under licenses approved by the US Commerce Department. The shipment also includes NVIDIA's GB300 Grace Blackwell class chips designed for advanced AI workloads. This deal sits within Microsoft's broader $15.2 billion UAE tech investment, which already includes 21,000 plus NVIDIA GPUs previously licensed for use. This announcement appears to contrast recent comments from President Trump suggesting stricter limits on AI chip exports. The UAE officials described this as a gold standard framework, aligning U.S. tech investment with regional commitments on AI development and data protection. So a couple more key takeaways from this were the AI capacity. So that equals influence. So GPU infrastructure is now diplomatic capital, the backbone of both national AI ambitions and enterprise innovation. And then you can expect more regulated access models for advanced GPUs with compliance as the new competitive differentiator for these. A couple questions for you, Eric, that I want to explore are, one, do you see the license regions becoming a long-term model for how AI compute will be distributed globally?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's a really interesting quandary or dilemma that you mentioned with President Trump on one hand saying he wants to control exports of AI and other technologies, but on the other hand, in a topic you've brought up in this podcast a few times, which is how do you balance innovation with controls and governance and regulation and all that stuff. And I think it's just another example and another reflection of the tricky, unclear path we're charting with AI and technology in general. Because on one hand, you think it helps the world overall if you've got, a global base of AI centers throughout the world and you're not overly dependent on any one country. But On the other hand, now, you've dispersed some of that political clout and economic clout to other parts of the world. And if you're a world leader, you might want to consolidate more of that. So I don't have a good answer for you because there's so many variables at play here, but it is interesting to see the vacillation or the back and forth that you see. And I think it just goes to show that none of us really know what this AI world is going to look like in the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years from now.
For sure. And one question with that is Microsoft says these GPUs will support OpenAI, Anthropic, and open source models. Should enterprises diversify model providers to mitigate dependency risk or double down on one ecosystem?
If I'd err on one side, I'd say probably diversifying right now, only because, again, we don't know what the tech landscape is going to look like in the world of AI in the next few years. And if we learned anything from the tech bubble of the late 90s and early 2000s, about 25 years ago, you learned that there was so much money going after these e-commerce providers. You look at companies like, I remember pets.com was like this hugely valuated pet store online that was supposed to be the next big thing. And it had this huge valuation. The stock price was through the roof, but the company couldn't figure out how to turn a profit and they failed. And, on the flip side, you looked at like Amazon, and Amazon at the time was investing just mass amounts of money that at the time I thought is somewhat reckless. I was like, how in the world is this company Amazon ever going to become profitable? Because they were just losing so much money and they just couldn't figure, they hadn't gotten to the scale, of course, that they are now. So, but they were investing in building that scale, with obviously a long-term vision. But I just question whether or not they could get through that. So on one hand, you had Amazon that came through it and now is just a dominant superpower in the economic world, especially in North America. But then you have other providers in the Y2K bubble burst like pets.com that just crashed and burned. So that's going to happen here in AI as well. There's going to be some shakeout. But in the meantime, tons of money going after all these different providers, and we don't know which ones are going to succeed. Sometimes I worry about it, or I wonder about NVIDIA. I know NVIDIA has actually been around a long time, and they have a pretty fascinating story of, some early failures that led to the success they're having now. But you do wonder, like you think, okay, they're one of the most highly valued companies in the world. Surely they'll be around for a long time, but you just don't know. And so I think, looking at different AI providers, diversifying, seeing how things evolve, and keeping innovation open and not being locked into any one provider, I think is something that will serve us all well, because I think we'll be surprised by some of the AI vendors that don't make it long term.
One question here for the global organizations. How should they think about AI infrastructure planning when export approvals, not pricing or vendor choice, can dictate where the GPUs are deployed?
Well, I mean, I think you have to plan ahead, and this is where lobbying comes into play, and foresight and planning and diversification potentially, if you can, just in case something doesn't work out geographically or geopolitically. So it gets into the whole thing we've talked about on the show as well, which is, when we talk about supply chains, a lot of what we have to worry about is geopolitics, wars, economic turmoil in different parts of the world, all that good stuff, political instability. Same is true for AI. You've got to think about, what are the potential tensions that might arise from different countries, and what limitations might there be on export controls and things like that. Obviously, we've had a big tariff. Tariffs have been a big conversation for much of the world for the last several months since Trump became president in the U.S. So there's a lot to think about. So I think just planning and diversifying and having a plan B is something that's going to be critical going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to get into our next newsworthy article of the day. This one is why India's tech pay slump matters to global IT leaders. So a little bit different than our first one today. But what's happening is median total compensation for engineering and data roles in India fell to about US dollars 22,000 in 2025, a drop of approximately 40% compared to the prior year. This puts India below several other emerging markets. For example, Brazil is around 67,000 and Mexico is around 48,000 median pay for similar roles. Meanwhile, the US median pay for comparable roles rose to around $150,000. The drop in India reflects the shift away from traditional labor arbitrage, offshoring roles like routine engineering or support, toward higher value activities such as AI and cybersecurity. The compensation model is emerging in markets is evolving, more equity grants and less license fee or less fixed salaries, especially where cost pressures are high. So some key takeaways from this was the skill premium is rising. So talent in AI, machine learning, and cybersecurity is at a premium globally. Regions with only general engineering may struggle more. And then also with that, the compensation models are also shifting. So emerging market talent may increasingly be paid in variable or equity heavy ways rather than fixed salaries. And this has obviously implications for retention and talent risk. Last key point I want to mention is the transformation strategy must evolve with this. So rather than outsourcing functions to low cost regions, companies should think about capability centers focusing on innovation, product, and advanced domains. Eric, a couple questions for you with all of this is just one, what is your general reaction? And how should we reassess our global talent location map in the light of India's shrinking cost advantage?
Yeah, I think that's been a talking point for a lot of offshoring companies for quite some time, because at some point it's inevitable that the standard of living for even the most developing countries are going to catch up to the rest of the world, or at the very least, it's going to wipe out or neutralize the advantage of the cost savings in terms of having to, the time zone differences, cultural barriers. If it's a physical product you're offshoring, obviously you've got shipping times that are increased by having stuff done offshore. But I think the bigger challenge here, the thing that I think this might be a reflection of, is just how AI is impacting tech companies, because so much technology, coding, development, things like that have been offshored to India, that now I wonder if AI is automating much of that and providing an even lower cost option, which might be why India's average cost or salary for employees is potentially coming down like that. So I think, it's important to look at the capabilities you're getting versus the cost. What's the real cost savings? Because a lot of times offshoring isn't as appealing as it looks on paper, because you've got, like I said, time zone differences, cultural differences, just expectation differences, different work environments, all that stuff that can actually create hidden costs, in the offshore model. So those are some of the things that come to mind when you think about that.
For sure. And then to ask you a question about the compensation structure that they mentioned in the article, how do changes in this structure affect our contract terms, incentives, and risks when companies do partner with an offshore team?
Yeah, I mean, it's how did the cost structure? How does this cost structure change? Is that what you said?
Yeah, like or sorry, the compensation
Oh,
structure. Yeah.
yeah. It's I guess it's to be determined on what that compensation impact will be and what the structure should be. But I think when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at I'm trying to figure out an overall business case for what is my total cost. Not just the compensation structure, but also the cost of delays because of time zone differences, and decision making gets slowed down, collaboration is a little bit more difficult, all that stuff. So I think looking at the total cost structure is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last question with this, what governance mechanisms should we establish to monitor evolving offshore hubs for value erosion, like cost, quality, innovation?
Well, I think it's, just like any other governance you put in place for any sort of project or capital initiative or just general initiative within an organization, is you have to have clear metrics that you're using to measure the value, and rather than just putting it on autopilot, signing a 3 or 5 year offshoring long-term deal and just letting it sit on autopilot and assuming that you're saving money along the way. Just really tracking, what is the real savings? Is it worth what we're doing? Because there's been a movement, not just because of politics and politicians, but also just at the ground level of businesses. There's been a movement towards bringing back some of that offshoring to domestic production and management, because there are all these hidden costs and some of the cost savings haven't materialized. And it's not true in all cases, but there are going to be situations where you're not saving the money you thought, or it's actually more cost effective to bring the work in-house or bring it back to your home country, especially when you talk about speed and predictability and ability to plan. Sometimes there's hidden costs there. If you're offshoring, it makes some of those areas more difficult, which increases your overall cost. So you just have to track those costs and have clear metrics in place for what you expect, and have a plan B and have an out of your staffing or your offshoring contracts if you need it.
For sure. Yeah. Some interesting topics today for sure, but I'm excited to get into this conversation with Mark.
Yeah, Mark Moffat, he's the CEO of IFS Software. I've had his predecessor, Darren Roos, who I believe is now chairman of the board. So he's stepped up and elevated out of the CEO role, from what I understand. And now Mark Moffat is the CEO. He's been in the role for about a year and a half now, I believe it is. And he's been with the company for a few years. I'll let him talk about his background, but we have some similarities in our respective upbringings. But he's going to be on the show here to talk about digital transformation trends, or the future of digital transformation in capital intensive and asset intensive industries. So if you're in heavy industrial manufacturing or utilities or any organization with field crews and field inventory, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. And then later in the show, we will introduce to you and present our top 10 enterprise systems for 2026. So we've got a lot more to cover in this episode 248 of Transformation Ground Control. Stick around. We'll be right back.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book. And it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 248. This is the tech-agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, here with Darian Chwialkowski. Third Stage Consulting is also the sponsor of this podcast and an independent tech-agnostic provider of digital transformation consulting services for clients throughout the world. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions, so be sure to check out collaboration opportunities with Major Tom. I've included contact information below if you'd like to collaborate on this podcast or other content that we produce as well. So all that being said, let's shift gears and bring on our first guest. This is Mark Moffat that we're going to introduce here in a moment. He is the CEO of IFS Software. He's someone I've known for a while. It's a company I'm very familiar with. We have many clients that have evaluated and in some cases selected and implemented IFS. So it's a product that's pretty intriguing, pretty unique niche in the market. Very capital intensive sorts of industries use the software, which is why we thought Mark would be the perfect person to have this conversation about digital transformations in capital intensive industries, just because there's so much complexity and risk and just unique nuances in those sorts of industries that you don't see in other industries. So we want to talk about some of those nuances. And of course, there's going to be some cross industry lessons to learn as well, even if you're not in a capital intensive business. So with that all being said, Mark, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Eric. I think it's taken us a few weeks to get this landed in our schedule. So I'm excited that we found an opportunity to chat about what's happening in the world of industrial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, better late than never. We finally got it. The stars finally aligned, and we finally were able to get this scheduled. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're not new in the role, but I had interviewed your predecessor in the past on this podcast. Tell us about how long you've been at the company and where how you grew up in the space and how you got to this point in your career, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, sure. I think perhaps in some senses, software CEO, I've got a bit of a different background to many of my peers, in that I actually started life as a chartered accountant. So I've got a finance training and background, and much of what we do today, even more so the case in the world of AI, is all about delivering kind of returns on investment. So that training stands me in good stead. I'm not sure our CFO likes the fact that I've been trained as an accountant in my past, but there you go. I worked with PwC for 24 years. And in the last part of my career at PwC, I was working very much entirely within the context of kind of enterprise transformation, invariably always technology centric. So I've got lots of experience of implementing all of the, large packaged applications you can possibly think of, from all the way from Salesforce to some of the hyperscalers to OCP, and of course more recently clearly IFS too. So quite a rich background and history. I spent a lot of time in the industrial space, global telecommunications and oil and gas and energy in particular. I've been at IFS now for 3 years, as you know, the first 18 months of which were as Chief Customer Officer, leading the services portfolio, working with the partner ecosystem, leading our support and our cloud operations organizations, which obviously put me in great stead for succeeding Darian, as you mentioned, in January last year. So almost 2 years in the job now.
Great. Yeah, time flies. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but I suppose it has. So, well, good. Well, so you've got quite the interesting career. By the way, you and I both started or had early years at PwC, so we had that commonality. I've also worked in the utilities industry and other capital intensive industries over the years. And I always find this industry, capital intensive businesses are just so interesting to me, partly because they're heavy duty industrial, they're pretty gritty, they're hands on. There's so much cool stuff that happens in these spaces. How do you see digital transformation evolving for capital intensive industries over the next few years, and what do you see developing right now in capital intensive industries?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting segment of industry, in the sense that a lot of the businesses that we deal with are largely invisible to the general public, but yet they're underpinning the engineering, economic prosperity and growth. The nature of the industries that we are serving are construction engineering, manufacturing, aerospace, defense, telecommunications, all capital intensive, asset heavy, as you mentioned, that literally are underpinning kind of economic and growth and prosperity and development of mankind. And it's often when things go wrong that you realize the importance and the criticalities of these industries. Otherwise, they're not in the mainstream, so to speak. But like many, they're going through significant change, not least of which is what's happening right now, clearly brought around by the demand for AI and the critical dependency that's now put on energy and energy transition as well. So there's trillions of dollars flowing in every year to industrial assets, grid modernization, global changes in supply chain, reindustrialization of Western economies. And when you conflate that with, in many cases, labor shortage, it's kind of weird that we talk about labor shortage sometimes in a world where we think AI is going to displace a lot of employment, but it's certainly the case in many of the countries and industries we deal with. So in many ways, it's a kind of perfect storm of lots of investment, lots of prosperity, big moves, the advent of AI, and a real need for people like IFS to play a role in helping our customers really benefit from these big secular trends, so to speak.
Yeah, so much happening in that space right now, and the transition to of power sources and whatnot puts a lot of strain on grids, and there's just so much cool stuff happening that needs technology to support it. And I'm going to follow up with that. Just a question here in just a moment, but I want to turn to the audience real quick and say hello to some guests that are joining or commenting on where they're joining. Say League on YouTube joining from Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you for joining today. Sanjay is joining on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. Madhu Sudan is joining from Laurel, Maryland. Thank you for being here. Darian joining on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. And I appreciate you all joining and commenting on where you're at here in the country today. So going back to that point about just some of the changes in asset-intensive industries, and the power industry, you just gave a good example of how that's changing. What are some of the unique challenges when it comes to technology? So as we apply or overlay technology against the backdrop you just laid out for us, what are some of the big challenges that you're trying to solve for your customers, and how are they using technology like IFS to solve those problems?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really simple challenge that I still think exists for many companies that we deal with, in that, lots of organizations have still got legacy application environments and, multitude of heterogeneous application landscapes. And in a world when you read the mainstream media and there's all this potential with AI and the use of domain models and small models and large language models and robotics and digital workers, there's a lot of organizations that today are sitting there with, existing estates that have been in place for a very long time. And the concept of moving, that estate to something that's more modern, that can benefit from the application of AI, I think is a very real challenge. It was brought home to me recently when I actually forwarded an article to our chief customer officer about another development in AI. It's moving so quickly right now. And, her response was something along the lines of, well, I'm actually at dinner with a customer right now, and, they're talking about the end of their cloud migration happening in 2032. And it really made me stop and think. I'm like, actually, there's a very big challenge, for many companies to find ways in which to access this AI potential. We've designed for that, Eric, and we've got a number of ways in which we're helping our customers benefit from AI that's appropriate to where they're at on their application journey. But as a generalism, I think it is true to say that a lot of companies are still dealing with very legacy technology.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, just like some of the assets themselves that they're managing are aging and becoming harder to manage, so is their technology in many cases.
I mean, one example, perhaps just to build on it a little bit more, I was dealing with a North American utility very recently with the head of operations, and we were talking about some of the challenges in bringing together a unified view on data, and that data pertaining to life cycle data of kind of assets in the grid, whether it be very simple things like transformer health. Transformers are critical in grid infrastructure. They're prone to failure. When they fail, they may lead to natural disaster, catastrophic event. And in this particular case, it's like, how can we bring together, all the data pertaining to that transformer, which we can then conflate against what OEMs describe is the maintenance routine required to get into much more preventative mode as it relates to trying to prevent, obviously, natural disasters. And that kind of capability isn't there yet on the market, and AI obviously allows for that.
Yeah, that actually leads into a question I want to pull up here from the audience. It's a really good one. But I want to say hello to a couple more people that are chiming in or joining in the stream here today. Alex from Plymouth, Massachusetts. Thank you for being here today. We have Nash joining from Zambia on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. And then we have it's Rachel on LinkedIn joining from Wisconsin, USA. So thank you for being here today. And then Jennifer on LinkedIn has a really good question here. It cuts off a little bit on the screen here, but I'll read it to you, the remainder of it to you. The question is, with platforms like IFS growing in capability, many organizations still run a multi-vendor environment. For the CIOs in the audience, what's the most common white space or integration challenge that even a sophisticated platform doesn't fully solve, requiring them to look to specialized partners or custom development? So what's the hardest part, do you think, technologically for a CIO to address in these sorts of industries?
I think it is the integration challenge, and particularly with the proliferation of agentic-based capability too. Like, how do you make choices? With the proliferation of solutions available, how many vendors can you take into your landscape, and getting that balance right on having a handful of strategic vendors that can work in concert together to give you the best outcome, I think is a real challenge. And if you look at the number of point solutions that are available right now in the market, startup organizations solving very, very narrow use cases, how do you stitch together that in a coherent frame that still allows frontline workers to have very simple day-to-day operating instructions? I get asked the question a lot about, what's the role of ERP and asset management and service management? What's the role of an enterprise software provider? Well, the nature of the companies that we're serving, the nature of the workforces that use our solutions, they're not using ChatGPT on the fly. They're not using Claude, up a telegraph pole. They need robust end-to-end processes that benefit from AI, it surfaced in the application itself, that still give a coherence to how they execute their day-to-day work. So getting that balance right on, the modern set of vendors and playing the vendors to their strengths is really tough.
Yeah. And speaking of AI, here's a question I love. I've never heard this question before. I don't think I've ever discussed this topic in particular, but it's a really good one. This is from Brend on LinkedIn. Brend says, assets are aging, but so is the workforce. How do you see AI addressing the aging workforce?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity here to codify, experience of an aging kind of workforce population. I was given an example recently of an aircraft maintenance engineer in an MRO facility who had 40 years worth of fingertip experience, as it was described. And how does one replace that in today's world when, certainly until this point, getting youth into those types of roles has been more challenging and more difficult. And then when you get the youth, in the broadest possible term, into those roles, how does one kind of teach and learn the same level of understanding a 40-year tenured aircraft technician might? And the answer, I think, is a multitude of different things. It's, what can one do to scrape the experience based on reports and inspections and casework that's done by that particular individual? Literally, is it about taking that individual and finding ways to transcribe the benefit of their experience, all of which is trying to build up a digital record of that individual's experience, and then surfacing that, A, for people coming into the trade, but B, for augmenting people who are in the trade today, so that they just get, a flywheel effect of all of that knowledge in that particular environment to help people in their day-to-day work. So they've got the intelligence at the point where they need it. A great example, or I've seen this play out in a slightly different example, is with the use of, so take that knowledge, and effectively you're codifying the experience of 40 years in that individual, replicate that by 20 people, you get quite a lot of experience. And if you build that into a model, and you can make that model available in a NVIDIA Jetson Edge large language model, and you can overlay that with a set of Ray-Ban glasses, and you've got technicians, younger technicians who are now making repairs, like real time, getting guidance on how to execute that repair. You can just see the level of potential that exists to ease that crunch on labor. But I think labor shortages are very real. I read this morning that in the US alone, there's like 1 million unfilled roles for skilled workers right now. Half of those are in manufacturing.
Really interesting. So, as you were just describing some of this futuristic things that aren't so future anymore, they're here. You guys are building a lot of new bleeding edge, cutting edge technologies, and then you're trying to sell that software or get these old school industries in some cases to adapt to that software. How do you guys address that gap, or what do you see that gap looking like in terms of, the old way, the legacy way of operating an asset intensive industry versus now Ray-Ban glasses enabled by AI and all the stuff that's so different and just groundbreaking compared to what was even possible 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, and it plays well to how we've to date executed on bringing AI to bear for our customers. There are 3 approaches to that, Eric. Number one is, for our customers today who have our solutions or who are in project or are about to take our solutions, bringing them native AI capability in the core application that they've spent good money on today, they'll spend good money on in the future, making sure that they still get a return on that application benefits, over time for the proliferation of AI is number one. That's the baseline. We call that embedded AI, so to speak. That then, from our perspective, how do we overlay that, which is coming from A to B, with some more bleeding edge, nascent frontier technology? Agentic would be one example. So we have an agentic solution. It's a business that we acquired in June this year. It's called the Loops. They were already in existence. They had built all of the context layers, the knowledge graphs of what it takes to span heterogeneous application landscapes and create agent-based routines. So an agent can be developed, a self-learning agent can be developed, order replenishment, a really basic example would be one, where that order replenishment agent can aid a worker or can replace, in many cases, roles to automatically fulfill replenishment of stock levels in a production process. 65 applications that they cover. They built that capability for us. You've got the embedded, then you've got the agentic, which obviously can leapfrog you a little bit in terms of dealing with legacy enterprise technology. And then the third aspect is accelerated development, next generation, bleeding edge technology bundled for a customer specific needs. And we call that Nexus Black. That Nexus Black team comprise world-class AI engineers, world-class data scientists, world-class UX designers who are working with our customers, working with the industries that we serve to identify the hardest to solve problems that could be solved potentially today with bleeding edge technology. So you bundle those three things, starting with the basic, as I mentioned, what you've got today, then we think we can really help play a role for our customers to benefit from AI, but do it in a way they can stage through it. And then when it comes to those Ray-Ban examples or other use cases, you're kind of deploying those use cases onto very coherent end-to-end value process flows that exist already today. And then the final thing I would say, and then I'll ask you next question, is that we've got the experience of dealing with these mission-critical industries, and we've been doing that for 40 years. We understand the criticality of the mission-critical operations that are often executed by our customers. So getting it right, getting it safe, but progressing the agenda is something we're very focused on.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, it's so fascinating to think about, how far, in some cases, how far behind some organizations are technologically, and then you start thinking about all this super futuristic stuff. And I think that's smart, what you're saying, replace what you've got, get that foundation in place, and then it's sort of like the exponential benefit and value you can get from there is pretty compelling.
What's often missing, I find, and when I deal with customers, and I try to spend a lot of time with customers, not just in a sales process, but in delivery and understanding, the experiences that they are having today, whether it be a CIO, whether it be a COO, whether it be a CFO, and how we can improve, right? And what alarms me is the number of occasions where, application vendors, as a generalism, they don't get down to first principles. What is it one is trying to achieve? What are the real frontline problems that are experienced by workers? Where is the trapped value in a business? And more often than not, a CFO, a CIO, a COO, they have a hypothesis on where there's trapped value, and they're very experienced people. And just coming down to those first principles and really working with them to think about how we can solve those things, 9 times out of 10 results in us bringing an MVP to bear and developing that MVP, finding a way to productize that MVP for the customer in question. And if we do our job right, then what we're effectively doing is we're allowing ourselves to scale that same capability to the rest of our industry customer base.
Yeah, very interesting. And speaking of AI, coming back to the Loops acquisition, this question is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, you brought up the Loops acquisition. Can you elaborate on how that fits into IFS's broader AI roadmap? What specific gaps does it fill or new capabilities does it unlock for your customers? So maybe we could dive into that a little bit more. What does this mean in terms of your overall tech stack that IFS is offering to customers?
Yeah, I think a very simple way to think about it is it's wrapping our existing IFS application stack, but it's wrapping it in a way that kind of binds the Loops capability with other applications in a customer's environment. We're not naive enough to think we're going to be the sole vendor in a customer's environment, and there's always going to be integrations, and there's always going to be boundaries to where the IFS perimeter exists. But in asset and service centric industries, which we know extremely well, what the loops allows us to do is kind of run routines that go outside the perimeter of IFS application landscape to automate processes. A really good one, which is another super basic example, but we see a massive demand for this. It's stunning to me how many businesses today have teams of individuals who are rekeying orders who are non-EDI from a multitude of different sources into an ERP. And that is lending itself perfectly to a digital worker, as we describe it, for order management. And we're seeing massive take up from that. And it surprised me a little bit because I didn't think, that the nature of that very basic use case would still be a thing, but it is. So it's allowing us to span, broader heterogeneous application landscapes, and there's self-learning built into it. The other cool thing about the loops, which comes next year, is that we're obviously, for the harder agentic capabilities and digital workers, we're investing time to make a template available, so to speak, to our customers. And we've got 10 that are available right now. There'll be 20 coming, 30, 40, 50. You get the idea as we roll this out. But we want to put this capability in the hands of our customers. So when they take a couple of digital workers, they take the platform. The platform will be available in Q1 to allow our customers to configure their own agentic capability. But it's, Darian, thanks for the question, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah. So it almost sounds like, or is it safe to say, correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misreading this, but it sounds like you guys are embracing the composable ERP concept, and you aren't necessarily trying to compete with, say, SAP or Microsoft D365, Oracle Fusion. You're trying to stay true to what you have grown up in, the space you guys have grown up in, but you're also recognizing that there's always going to be needs for other potential technologies, and now you're providing a tool set to tie it all together. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think we're solution-led and we're value-led. Now, we believe that we're the world's leading enterprise application software company that's AI native, that it is number one for asset and service, asset lifecycle, right the way from capital planning and allocation all the way through to O&M further downstream. And that's our focus in the industries that we've been serving. We think that gives us massive depth beyond what others can match. But again, we'd be naive to think we're the sole source. But as we get into a discussion with a prospective customer, it often starts in one area. I need some help with maintenance planning. And as you get into the dialogue, you realize that maintenance planning is just the start. And in the context of maintenance planning, actually procurement and supply chain fulfillment in the context of maintenance planning would be a really useful addition and increases the overall ROI of the deployment of the application. So we end up with a composable solution, and composability has been something that's guided us from 2021 when we launched IFS Cloud, is absolutely the way we go. And what invariably happens as well, Eric, is we say thank you. We work with the customers to deliver the value that we can. We have value engineering that holds us collectively accountable to delivering the outcomes that we promised through the sales cycle, which we monitor extremely carefully, not just in the sales, but all the way through to execution. And if we do that job right and we deliver, what happens? Customer wants to take more. Right. They like what they get. They see the value. We've been able to track the value. We've been able to sign it off collectively. And the nature of the solution footprint extends in the context of what we want to be known for, asset lifecycle and service lifecycle. I'm
here with Mark Moffat, the CEO of IFS. We're talking about the future of digital transformation in capital-intensive businesses. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that'll allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 248. My name is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, an independent tech-agnostic consulting provider of digital transformation consulting services. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com, and the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting as well. So I'm here with Mark Moffat, who is the CEO of IFS Software. We're here talking about the future of digital transformation in capital-intensive businesses. Here's a really cool comment that you might appreciate, Mark. This is from Alex, and I actually know Alex on LinkedIn. I know him because we've been connected a long time. He's a CIO, and it sounds like he's a customer of yours, which I did not realize. But Alex says, as an example, we are currently implementing Loops project to scrape email for PO confirmations and changes and automatically update IFS. This will be very helpful for planning. So that, that's not simple, but that's a small microcosm, just one step in a process that I could see that being a pretty huge lift, in terms of just getting rid of that manual process that's prone to error and a lot of inefficiency. But what are your thoughts? Are you seeing other examples like this with how your customers are using Loops and AI in general?
Yeah, no, a huge number of examples like this that, again, seem very basic in their nature, but add huge value. In many cases, it's taking away from, labor that can be deployed elsewhere. It's tasks that are prone to error. And actually, it creates drag on fulfillment for customers. And this type of capability, you could tell by the nature of the question. Imagine you put a self-learning on that. The first time around, perhaps the PO coming in doesn't have all the supplier detail. The supplier detail gets updated. The agent remembers that the next time it sees an email from the same inbox. So it's constantly evolving, constantly learning, getting faster, getting more accurate, and increasing the overall customer satisfaction as well. But no, it's a great example, and thanks, Alex, for being a customer of the Loops.
Yeah, if you have any other examples, Alex, or anyone else, I'd love to hear it too, because I'm really fascinated by this path we're on as an industry, where there's so many limitless possibilities of how AI could be used. But to see even just the smallest, most micro examples of how it's being used, I think that's huge, because then it gives other organizations ideas of how we could start deploying AI. And that's what I really like about it too, is that it opens up a certain amount of creativity and flexibility that you didn't really have with traditional ERP systems in the past. And now all of a sudden you can start thinking about creative ways of using AI to connect the dots between, some of your inefficient processes and the full potential of what ERP systems could have and should have been doing all along. But now we've got a tool that can actually enable that.
I mean, there's no shortage of ideas here, Eric. That's one of our challenges. But having those three approaches I described earlier keeps us super focused on what return we're able to create for our customers.
Yeah. Now, if we shift gears and look at field operations, maintenance, and asset performance, how are you seeing AI change the way that companies are managing field ops and maintenance and asset performance?
I think the number one way for me, it's moving from reactive to predictive. If you can get more intelligence into the operation, so you can proactively be catering for otherwise downstream fails or maintenance planning, that's the holy grail as far as I'm concerned. One example that we're working on right now in the case of a utility, again, patrol crews, drive along highways, scanning for faults, for foliage coming across power lines, for rust, for all sorts of issues operationally. But we're trialing now use of Jetson technology and cameras to automatically detect early stage signs that couldn't be caught by the human eye, let alone at 45 miles an hour down a highway, issues in the grid infrastructure and transmission. And in that world, automatic triggers, automatic diagnosis, automatic triaging of early stage development of an issue, which then generates work orders, which then allows work orders to be deployed into crews who happen to be in that area incoming. You can just see so much orchestration and optimization of maintenance from that perspective. So I think the big shift for me is moving to predictive, and obviously all of the benefits you get that ought to be obvious. You don't have downtime, you don't have outages, you don't have potential loss of life in many situations. So that's the big shift for me.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned this early in this conversation. You were talking about the complexity of systems and processes in these sorts of industries. And you just hit on one that I think AI has the potential to solve finally, which is, I remember, it's been 20 years since I was deep into the utilities industry, but I remember how complex it was trying to figure out how to get geospatial data from a GIS system to interact with your ERP system, which tracks the more traditional, call it the two-dimensional data, like inventory number, part numbers, and warehouse bin locations and things like that. Now all of a sudden it's not as simple as just which bin location in a warehouse does my part exist. Now it's where in the hell is it in the field, of all these, thousands of locations it could possibly be. And so being able to convert that geospatial data into meaning and tying it all together, I imagine that could be a huge game changer for utilities and other field service type organizations.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a number of customers we're speaking to right now, actually with our Nexus Black team that I've referenced, that are talking about inventory spare part optimization. I mean, huge. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars caught up in inventory that can't be deployed because of lack of insight and data. A very practical example, which I hadn't fully appreciated until yesterday, and I was speaking with an O&M provider of renewables, and this individual was describing to me that actually, the number of spare parts that sit in inventory have got a multitude of different applications into other, tower stacks and wind turbines, but no one can untangle it because the OEMs label everything on a proprietary basis, and it's really difficult to see how you might use a gearbox from one asset in another asset, and therefore you sit on 5 times the inventory levels you need. So that is a capability we're working on right now with that one customer, and there are many more other like it. So this whole data aggregation, I think, is a huge area of opportunity for us.
Yeah, we've tried. We tried middleware 20 or 30 years ago. We tried other integration tools, and we still use integration tools, obviously, as an industry. But now AI can help. It doesn't solve all the world's problems, but it does start to provide another way to tie together all these data sources.
And I think one of the challenges, obviously, is we're moving from a deterministic world to a probabilistic world. And in a probabilistic world, you are entertaining, less sequential, less sequenced step-by-step analysis. So you do introduce a degree of risk, and obviously that's been a challenge with large language models today. They're not operating with 99.999% reliability. So how do you get that same level of reliability when you put a probabilistic model to bear in the example perhaps I've just given? And the answer for me is with the availability of mass computational capacity, it has to be about running hundreds of different scenarios that allow you to drive up the 90% reliabilities to something in the 5 nines. So that is a challenge, and that's something that is being overcome too.
Right. And you talked about the mission criticality of your client base and how in many cases it is life or death situation, or at the very least it's critical to the economy. So you've got these mission critical operations, and then on one hand that's what you've got on one hand. On the other hand, you've got innovation and leading edge technologies like we were talking about before. How do you manage the reliability and the need to be somewhat conservative and maybe risk adverse, for lack of a better word? You've got to make sure you're stable, you're reliable, you're not taking on any unnecessary risks in your operations and all that good stuff. How do you balance that with the innovative nature of what you're talking about? How do we bridge that gap or reconcile those two potentially competing priorities to be innovative versus reliable?
I'll give you a non-technical answer, and it's as simple as eyes wide open. You get into this dialogue and you get into pushing the boundaries with what is possible. And as long as you go in with a mind on the risks, and you go in knowing you're pushing the boundaries, and you find sensible ways, on a first principles basis, to design solutions that are capable of being rigorously tested against the risks you've described, then you always end up in a better place. And the technology often isn't the problem. It's moving the hearts and minds. It's getting people into the art of the possible. It's, you know, getting over the inertia that in mission critical operations you can't mess with it because of, you know, some of the things we've just described. So it's those types of motions. I was with a CEO recently of a large manufacturing chemicals business in the UK recently, and we talked about, you know, how to fabricate the next generation, you know, IT function in the future with next generation technology, and it was all a people-based conversation. You know, how do I get my teams to accept the degree of change that's coming and to run towards it with eyes wide open?
Right. Yeah, you can be, you know, or you can manage risk and innovation at the same time, but you know, it's going to be probably not palatable to just take on the innovation and the risk without having solid risk mitigation, solid planning, all that good stuff, all the eyes wide open piece of it, I think.
And how can you bring additional data to bear to ultimately, you know, de-risk what would otherwise be seen as a risk? So if it's you know, collective knowledge and experience in a business of generations of maintenance on a particular part of an asset, you know, can you access OEM data? Can you access competitor data? You know, what are the different dimensions that allow you to underwrite the quality of the decisions you take in the technology? You know, can you overlay that with weather? Can you overlay that with, you know, different modalities of data? You know, voice, video, pressure. You know, there's an example which isn't quite answering your question or your statement that we're working on right now. Again, in a utility scenario, we're using robotics to inspect manhole ducts, and the robotics is gathering, you know, 20 different measurements every yard in a manhole duct. You know, pressure, light, video, gas sensing, you name it. Like, so the more data you get, the more you can overlay it onto problem statement, the thing you're trying to solve. Obviously, the more you get accuracy.
Right. Yeah, that's a good, really good point. Now, what about this is from Brent on LinkedIn. Brent says, for organizations excited about AI and in particular agentic AI, but hesitant due to data quality, data availability, and governance challenges, where should they start to unlock value responsibly?
Well, number one would be start.
Right.
Yeah, and find somebody you can partner with. You know, the agentic capability is pretty early in its maturity. Something that we do all the time with our customers, and I'm sure others do too. So start, develop a hypothesis, understand the data you have available, what the maturity is of that data, you know, in each and every data component that you're using, and then the governance just flows naturally from that, in the sense of having to take the decisions you do in order to pilot the capability. Now, what we do in the early stages, Bernd, is we make sure that we've got human in the loop. So the agent will always have human in the loop until such time there's confidence that the agent can operate autonomously. And even then, in an autonomous situation, what we've built into our platform is agent lifecycle management. So everything's logged, everything's tracked, everything's secure. So in the unlikely event you have a problem, you've always got an ability to diagnose what happened and to roll things back if you need to. But I think the fundamental thing for me is, and I'm sure you would agree, you know, this wave of digital work is coming. This wave of robotics is coming. And my encouragement to everyone, us included, by the way, in our business, you know, because, you know, we run business operations as well. It might be different, Bernd, for yours. That's exactly what we're doing. We're starting, and we're making it feel uncomfortable. And when you make it feel uncomfortable and you get into disruptive ways of thinking and innovation, you know, you always end up in a better place.
Yeah. So speaking of being in a better place, when you look at some of your more successful customers that have deployed the IFS core product or the loops, or, you know, combination of the products that you guys offer, what is it that's made those clients more successful than others? You know, are there certain themes or certain lessons you have from some of your call it your top performing customers that have just done the most with technology and what you'd consider the most successful with their digital transformation initiatives?
I think, I mean, it's a bit boring, but, you know, whenever I've seen projects not deliver or face challenge, it's the same old things. It's a lack of governance. It's a lack of user engagement at the beginning. It's a lack of, you know, to-be process design. You It's the governance, when things go a bit wrong, not calling things out wrong early. In some cases, the vendor's not close enough and they become a bit of a scapegoat. It's all the basic things. It's about 101 project management, and the best implementations that I've seen have got those things right. And we were very insistent with big programs of activity. We want to be around the table. We want skin in the game, because we recognize that things do go wrong. If you're pushing the boundaries and you're delivering next generation technology, it's really hard. And it's really hard at the technology level. It's really hard at the hearts and minds level. And we know there's going to be problems. So we want to be at the table, and we do that in as many cases as we can, so we can play our part in that sequencing. But it honestly, it's those things I find. Pretty much every case where there's been a challenging situation that I've been called into, something in the program management, something in the governance has gone on. It's got nothing to do with technology.
Yeah. Well, and you said it's kind of boring. And actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking, I think what we all should aspire to is let's make our digital transformation boring. Boring in that it's not chaotic, it's not a train wreck, it's not a mess, it's not a bunch of firefighting. It's actually deliberate and planned, and you've got a clear vision for what it is you're trying to do, and you win the hearts and minds, as you said, to use your words. I think that's the key thing. And of course, having the right technology is important, but the right technology doesn't matter if you don't get that other stuff right that you're talking about.
I met a CEO yesterday who committed to IFS, and he's put the program in a bit of a go slow. And I'm like, help me understand why you put it in a go slow. He's like, Mark, we don't understand what process we want, and we're going to run the risk. We're going to say to you, design us a system, and you're going to design a system, and you'll do the best you can. But if we're not clear on what we want, then and you've not guided us on best practices, then we're just going to have a bunch of regret costs. And I applauded him. I was like, that's amazing. Somebody, senior business leadership position, recognizes the difference an enterprise application can make. And in that case, it's finance, and it's O&M, and it's asset service. And he's put the brakes on at his cost.
Yeah.
And he's done exactly the right thing.
Yeah. Well, and he brings up a good point too, in one of the things you just mentioned, in that you mentioned it a few minutes ago about how the vendor can oftentimes become a scapegoat when something goes wrong. And I think as a leader, it's easy, and it sounds good in theory, to say, well, Mark, you're the expert. You know the technology. Why don't you just go figure that out? And I'm going to be over here, doing my other day job. And that's just never goes well. As smart as you are, as smart as your team is, as good as your technology is, that's just not going to work, because it doesn't fit what that business needs necessarily. And so I think it's a good point.
It's why we invested 10 years ago disproportionately in value engineering. We put a lot of effort into, and in simple terms, it's making sure that we've got a very detailed case, a value case, which is, yes, about financial metrics, but it's also about non-financial metrics that are relevant to that company. And everyone at the beginning, through the life cycle, by the time we get to the end of the business case creation or the value case are super clear on what constitutes success. And that pervades all the way through the project life cycle, and it pervades into go live and beyond. And unashamedly, we'll continue to invest in that, particularly in the advent of AI. Because unless you're tracking what you're solving for, and unless you can put it in P&L terms or other metric terms that make a difference to your business, then you're wasting your time.
Yeah. Here's a question from Jennifer. We sort of started to answer this, but I'll maybe we'll dive into a little bit more here. This is from Jennifer on LinkedIn. Jennifer says, Mark, in your journey from finance at PwC to leading a global enterprise platform like IFS, and Eric, through your experience consulting with hundreds of organizations, what's the greatest misconception that you've seen C-suite leaders hold about what it takes to successfully implement digital transformation? So what are your thoughts there?
Wait, they've asked both of us. You go first.
Yeah, damn it. I was hoping you would buy me some time there. Yeah, I'd say, probably the biggest misconception is what I just mentioned about leaders thinking that the vendor is going to solve all their problems and they've got all the answers. And it's not that they're not smart people. They don't know their technology. They, of course, do. But again, you have to have a clear vision and clear understanding of what it is your priorities are, what you're trying to accomplish. And I'd say this is even more important now than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago, because of what we talked about earlier, which is there's so many things you could be doing with AI, but you can't do them all. So figure out what it is you need. And you go back to that example that Alex brought up around the PO, or using AI to scrape the PO confirmation from an email and being able to update IFS automatically. That's a good example of where, hey, that's a pain point for us. It's inefficient. It would provide a better customer experience if we could just automate that process, whatever. And so having a very clear, deliberate way that you're going to use technology to improve your business, I think is important. And not having that, the opposite of that would be what I would consider one of the biggest failure points. And then I'd say the second thing is something you actually mentioned, Mark, which is winning the hearts and minds. If you can't win the hearts and minds of your employee base, this project's probably not going to go well. And you need everyone from executives to mid-management all the way down to the front lines. You need them all on board and excited and aligned with where the direction you're going. You're not going to get everyone that's 100% excited and committing their full-time jobs to it, but you do need a certain amount of commitment from the entire organization. So those are the two things I'd say is making sure you focus on those two areas. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to build on what you've said, I think to make it super explicit, I think often what's misconceived is it's really hard work. It's really tough. This stuff is not easy. And in some cases, depending on the nature of the technology that you're replacing, it's like poured concrete from 25 years ago. And it's built into the very fabric of the organization. So it's really, really hard. And then I think the other thing, which you've mentioned, but just to put my own kind of words on it, is the misconception that they don't need to sponsor it. Like, you need to sponsor it, you need to champion it, because guess what? People role model behavior based on leaders, and if leaders don't demonstrate their commitment to underpinning programs like this, that underpin the very basis of a business, it's really hard. So those are the two things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And actually, Jennifer had a follow-up comment here that sort of encapsulates or summarizes everything you and I just said, which is, she says, insightful, shows the biggest risks are internal execution gaps, not the technology itself. And I think that's a good summary of the misperception that technology is going to solve your problems for you. It gives you a tool to potentially solve those problems, but it doesn't solve it alone. So those are good points. Going back to the leadership thing, in building on the example you were just talking about, the CEO who want to slow down a bit to figure out what it is they wanted to be when they grew up before they got too far into the project. What are some of the other leadership traits that make or break large scale transformations like these? In addition to, the fortitude to make tough decisions, you sort of alluded to that a moment ago. But what are the other traits that you expect or that you coach your client leaders on as they prepare to embark on these projects?
I think what I spend a lot of time trying to understand is, what's the business objective? What's the strategic end game? What's the goal? Like, we aspire to be, particularly right now in this world that we're in, we aspire to be a technology partner, not a software vendor. And in being a technology partner, what are the different attributes that make that business successful? Actually, individually, what's that individual's goals? What are they trying to do with the business? And invariably, I always find opportunities to evolve what we're doing for that customer to find a bigger way to meet that need. Equally, if I'm meeting with manufacturers and in listening to the objectives of the C-suite in the manufacturing domain, it might highlight some gaps in the solution, and that informs our M&A strategy, because we are active in M&A, and what we pride ourselves on in M&A is finding capabilities that expand the solution breadth and depth as it relates to asset and service life cycle, as it relates to the capital intensive asset heavy industries that we solve. But it's I think getting to the so what is super important, and finding ways to link what we do to the so what.
Right. Yeah, good.
It's more interesting, for our people. If we've got teams of people who are working really hard, because this stuff is really hard, when they can identify with the difference it makes, to the strategic objectives of the customer, guess what? Everyone's just more emotionally bought in.
Right.
And more prepared to go that extra mile. I am.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said before, it is difficult. The projects are difficult, but what you need to do to be successful, to power through those difficulties, isn't that difficult. I mean, it's simple what you need to do. It's just the problem is it's easy to get distracted by the wrong things and focus on or over prioritize the wrong things in these sorts of projects.
Yeah, we have a success offering, Eric, and one of the things that's really cool about our success offering is that it's obviously very relevant in the context of a project lifecycle. But where it's misunderstood and which has massive value beyond is the success team that are working with the customer in the life of the agreement we have after go live. They're constantly trying to find ways to improve. They're constantly trying to find ways to say, okay, we have an aerospace customer here that's using our software quite happily. What's the customer over there doing? And how are they using it in a new way? Oh, the latest release of the software is coming. What's coming? How can we get ahead of this? How can we take advantage? What's in the roadmap? Like, oh, roadmap, have you thought about ABC? Because that reflects the need in this customer and how their environment is changing. So when you get into that mode, you become that technology partner.
Right. Now, when you look ahead to, the next 3 to 5 years, which seems like an eternity at the pace that technology is changing right now. But when you look ahead, what emerging technologies or business models will most disrupt the way field service and capital intensive companies operate? What are the things you guys are preparing for in your roadmap? In this industry?
Well, firstly, I mean, you're right. I mean, the pace of change right now, I think, is unprecedented. I really believe that. I mean, I've always been a voracious reader and watcher and learner, and I can't keep up some days. I'm like, what just happened this week? I still haven't looked at what Bill Gates has said about climate this week. I'm waiting for a moment where I can just go and understand, his perspective on that. So the pace is just relentless right now. And given that statement, I've forgotten your question. What was it?
What was my? I was enthralled with what you were saying, and I was actually
5 years out. 5 years out.
Yeah, 5 years out. I was getting a bit distracted thinking about a whole different topic, which was what you were just saying. We're talking a lot about AI and knowledge. Like, just think about, we're talking about technology and how AI is being used in the B2B world, but imagine just in general how fast the world's going to change with this additional knowledge, access to information, analysis, speed. It's scale. So sorry, that was a total detour from the real question, which is 3 to 5 years out. What problems do you think you're going to try and solve?
Yeah, I think obviously the proliferation of AI right now characterized by clearly consumer grade AI in the form of ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Gemini and others. I think most people will see the potential for it, and most people will see how that's evolved from a consumer experience perspective. Interestingly, some of that's rolling back now, though. I saw this week that ChatGPT are rolling back on being able to diagnose medical conditions. I've used ChatGPT a couple of times to help me with what's going on there, so I'm a bit disappointed by that. But it's rolling back, which is super interesting by itself. But you've seen the rate of progression, and you can immediately think about the rate of that progression in the context of what companies do on a day-to-day basis, and that's the kind of thing that we're focused on. But I think the not yet fully appreciated technology that's going to make a massive difference is the prevalence of robotics. We actually, our board went to Silicon Valley relatively recently, and we met a robotics company whilst we're there. And I think we're all blown away by this humanoid robot and where it's at right now in its dexterity and its ability to carry out kind of tasks. Albeit in a consumer type environment, but there's many applications for that in some of the industries that we serve. And then as we've looked at collaborations with other robotics firms, and we're going to launch a collaboration with one of those on the 13th of November when we host a event in New York, it's huge. And then you think about the unit cost of production of these robots when they get to a certain sense of maturity and scale, and the number of companies, whether it be the Elon Musk robotic, or whether it be the 3 or 4 other firms that are notable. It's just the capacity is potentially huge. That's before you even get to the capability of the Chinese robots. I saw one in Saudi last week, Unitary. It's huge. So the disruption that's going to create, I think, is not yet well understood, but will be, I think, the biggest challenge to be overcome in the next 3 to 5 year time horizon you gave. Now, what we're doing right now, in a sense of running to where the puck is going, as well as thinking about the role of humans augmented by AI, the role of digital workers, and we talked about the Loops platform, and the role of robotics is the field service, the asset management, the capabilities that we are developing are making sure that we're solving for that blended, orchestrated workforce, the future. But the robotics is the key thing to answer your question.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point, which is, it's not just the physical acts that robots can perform, which is fairly staggering on its own. But when you look at the data that robots are capable of capturing, I think it's fascinating. And one of our clients, just to give a shameless plug to one of our clients, we consult with a company called Boston Dynamics out of Boston that makes robotics, humanoid robotics, other types of robotics, mainly used in B2B environments. And there's military applications and law enforcement applications as well. But what I found fascinating just from learning about this client is just how many data sources and data points that they're capturing every second. And so you combine that with AI and the whole, big data, Internet of Things trend that was already underway. And I could see how this could be a pretty big, I think exponentially, I mean, the possibilities are limitless. You were talking earlier about how when you're driving by 45 miles an hour down a highway, you're not going to be able to see a problem or spot a problem necessarily out in the field. But if you had robots out in the field, they probably could, and they could alert back when there is a potential problem.
Yeah, 100%. It's huge, and we like Boston Dynamics a lot.
Yeah, well, good. Glad to hear. We do too. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So this is actually this is sort of part 2 of my question, and then I'll wrap things up. But this is from Darian actually on LinkedIn, but she's asking a very specific question. I just want to get your knee-jerk reaction, even though it is a very specific use case, but I like it because it gets us thinking about how AI might be used in the future. So Darian asks, looking ahead, do you see a world where predictive maintenance and spare part optimization merge into a fully autonomous supply chain where the system can not only predict a fault, but automatically order, allocate, and dispatch the right part?
Yeah, no, 100%. That's exactly what we're solving for right now. Exactly what we're solving for. And we feel particularly bullish about it, Darian, because we're a product-centric ERP company. We're fully invested in health of the asset and asset planning and asset maintenance, and we support field service. We support tens of thousands of technicians. We're now on, I think, 600,000 technicians globally that we support with our software. So we got that understanding of the total life cycle, and we see a world where somebody's dispatched on a optimized basis based on all sorts of things, skills, capabilities, routing, etc., and knowing what they're about to encounter, analyzed by AI. They put the right equipment in their vehicle, they get onto site, they don't have the right equipment, through natural language and indexing, automated work orders, automated ordering spare parts, automated fulfillment of that part to the next available crew. That whole world, absolutely, it could be fully autonomous, but it isn't going to replace in the short term, the woman or man who's in the field executing that task. And robotics might come at some point in the future, but I think for a lot of those tasks that we solve, that's still going to be highly skilled labor.
And so that leads to another question from Patrick on LinkedIn. Says, you invest a lot in AI, especially around ERP. From your perspective, when will ERP be fully autonomous? How far are we? So how far in general are we from what you just described, that future state that you said in the short term, probably not, you still need the human high skilled labor, but how far out do you think we are from achieving this future state vision you're talking about?
Yeah, I think for that example I've given, with the exception of the human in the loop, because there will be a human in the loop always observing and looking at exceptions and whatnot, and the individual carrying out the highly skilled work at the end, I think we're 12 to 18 months away. Okay. And when you bridge that into the totality of an ERP and all of the value chains that are executed, I think you're probably 3 to 5 years away.
Okay, interesting. Well, what do you want to leave us with in terms of where you're taking IFS, the future of IFS, any fun events, conferences? Just tell us what to expect here in the next 6 to 12 months, and how can we learn more about IFS for those that might be interested in learning more about you guys?
Yeah, well, we're always available. We're a very high-touch organization. We all spend a significant amount of time with customers in the way that I've described over the course of this conversation. That's what keeps us relevant. If we listen to what's happening in our customer base, like properly listen, not play lip service to it, but actually engage, and we respond in the capabilities that we develop, we think we're going to be in a high growth state for a very long time based on what value customers are getting from what they tell us they want. So in some ways, it's super simple. A massive thank you to any customers. Alex is clearly on today. who've joined the podcast. We are here literally for you. And we're determined to be the number one industrial software company on the planet, and with world-class asset and service capabilities that we're already recognized for. And we're so grateful for the opportunity to create the value we can for our customers.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Great conversation. Appreciate you being here today, and appreciate all the great questions we had. We've got some more we're going to follow up on from that conversation, and we're also going to present to you our top 10 enterprise systems for 2026. So we've got a lot more to cover in this episode. Be sure to stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my.
Hello, and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 248. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Mark on the show. We talked about the future of digital transformation and capital-intensive businesses. What were some of your thoughts and questions and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, that was a great conversation with Mark. He made some really great points during it. A couple questions I have from you, Eric, for your take, I guess, at least. Mark did talk about how companies are still working toward cloud migrations, and he mentioned finishing in 2032. In your opinion, how realistic is it for industrial clients to keep the pace with AI advancements on that kind of timeline?
Yeah, good question. It's going to be difficult for some. Some will have an easier time than others. So I don't know that there's one answer I could give you other than to say that there's going to be holdouts. I mean, there's going to be entire organizations, or at the very least, technologies within organizations that fail to make that transition to the cloud by 2032 or anytime in the next few years, partially because of inertia and adversity to change, but also because there's just going to continue to be technologies out there that can't be addressed by cloud offerings as they exist today. And I also think I still think that in the next few years, between now and this march we're all making towards the cloud, and the vendors are all pushing pretty hard to the cloud, I do think the pendulum is going to swing back to more of a hybrid environment where, maybe you've got certain apps that are in the cloud, and then you might have others that are on-prem. I don't know that the long-term answer is going to be doubling down on the cloud. Now, software vendors and investors would prefer that to be the case, and I think they probably want that to be the case because they make a lot more money with cloud subscription models than they did with the old on-prem model. So I think they're going to continue to push and tout the future of cloud, and they will, I think they'll always lead with the cloud, but I think there's going to be, the reality is what the customers want, what the customers do. And I think you're just going to have a subset. I don't know how big that subset is, but you'll have a subset of companies that just don't move to the cloud at all. And maybe it's for lack of wanting to change. Maybe it's because of regulatory controls and data governance and that sort of thing. Or it could be that there's just certain technologies that are on-prem that give them more flexibility and more of a competitive advantage, and they want to retain that competitive advantage. So I think there's a lot of reasons why some organizations and technologies won't ever make the full transition to the cloud.
For sure. And after this conversation, what do you think the next 3 to 5 years will look like for AI in asset-intensive industries?
Well, I think you're going to see I mean, there's just so much activity. I mean, there's so many opportunities in this space. I mean, there is in every industry out there, every industry we work in with our client base. There's just so many potential use cases that it's almost overwhelming, and you've really got to slow down and focus, because it's easy to get excited about all these limitless possibilities. So I think, I don't think we will have completely boiled the ocean and figured it all out in the next 4 or 5 years, but I think we're going to have a lot more interesting use cases than we do now. And we're already starting to see a lot more of it in that conversation. We had the CIO who chimed in and said, here's how we're using AI, or here's an example of how we're using AI within our asset intensive organization. So I think, we'll go from just scratching the surface to having some really meaty use cases of AI. But as Mark mentioned, it's not like things are just going to stop and we're going to catch up to that point and we will have achieved some sort of milestone. It's just the goalposts are going to constantly be moving, and the vendors are going to constantly push the boundaries of what technology can do. And so I don't know that we're ever going to settle on, okay, we've got AI all figured out in 5 years, because AI will change. The use cases will change. We'll start to have robotics and things that, Mark was talking about that'll totally change the dynamics of it. So I think we're in for a pretty wild ride of constant change that will probably never stop. So I think it's really important for organizations to pace themselves, because this is going to be a long haul here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Definitely don't get too overwhelmed and too excited, and then you can't keep up that same pace, I feel like. So yeah, super interesting conversation with Mark today.
Yeah, very good stuff. Yeah, good to have him. We'll have to have him back on in the future. And we're going to shift gears. And we had one vendor on the show, or one representative from that vendor in IFS. And now we're going to talk about some other vendors as well. We're going to talk about the top 10 enterprise technologies for 2026. And every year we try to do these top 10 lists, different categories, whether it's ERP or CRM or HR tech, supply chain solutions, et cetera. Sometimes we'll do top 10 rankings for certain industries. But we decided this year the lines between ERP and CRM and AI and HR tech, those lines are blurring so much that it probably doesn't make sense, or as much sense in the future, to have such a clear box or definition of what a technology is when they can do so many different things. So what we did this year for the first time is we identified the top 10 enterprise technologies as a whole category. And this includes AI, ERP, integration tools, platforms, applications, all these different options you have, which are not one size fits all. And each category has its different strengths and weaknesses. But we did our best to look at some of the criteria that we use to evaluate potential fit and ROI and value for the clients we work with. And we assembled this list. So this is our tech agnostic view of the top 10 enterprise technologies for 2026. I'm going to play you the video that I recently published on my YouTube channel, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Coming in at number 10 of our top 10 systems for 2026 is Rapid. And if you don't know Rapid, it's spelled R-A-P-P-I-T. It's founded by Jan Bond, who is also the founder of Bond Software, which is one of the early pioneers of ERP systems. And what's interesting about Rapid is that it is an entirely different platform and application than the old school ERP model, even though the product was designed by someone that also pioneered the ERP software model as we know it today. Now, Rapid is more of a platform, a composable ERP with AI-driven workflows that allow you to take advantage of more modern technologies without necessarily having to rip out all your back office systems. So you can still have your core enterprise technologies like ERP or CRM systems as your core system of record. But now with Rapid, you can bolt onto that more integration tools, more workflows, and more artificial intelligence and better business intelligence that you might have if you didn't have anything to tie those different systems together. And for many organizations, this is a lower risk way and a lower cost way to get immediate business value without having to go through the pain, cost, and heartache of a massive back office system replacement. Now, the thing holding back Rapid is, first of all, its scale. It's not scaled yet as far as having a broad, robust ecosystem worldwide. And it's a newer product. It's not new, but it's newer. It's still early in the maturity cycle. It may move up in the ranking in years to come, but for now, it's enough to land Rapid at number 10 on our top 10 list. Coming in at number 9 on our top 10 technologies for 2026 is SAP S/4HANA. Now, in years past, when we've done the ERP-focused rankings, SAP ranks much higher. But as we look at the broader enterprise technology landscape, we think that SAP is at a disadvantage. However, it's still enough to get into the top 10. Now, the reason why SAP is in the top 10, despite some of its disadvantages that I'll talk about here in a moment, is the fact that it has such broad scale. It is such a broad, robust, complex product that can handle a lot of different capabilities, especially for larger multinational organizations. So that's probably the biggest strength, is that it is a very scalable product. But where it struggles, and where I think it will continue to struggle in 2026 and beyond, is its lack of flexibility. It's just simply not as flexible as some of the more composable systems and technologies in the marketplace, including many of those that are in the top 10 here today. In addition, innovation, I think, is a disadvantage for SAP. Even though it's a massive organization with massive R&D budgets, it's just a company and a product that can't change fast enough to keep up with the rapid pace of technology. And for that reason, that's what's holding back SAP S/4HANA from being higher on the list. But all that being said, that's enough to land SAP S/4HANA at number 9 on our list of enterprise technologies for 2026. Coming in at number 8 on our list of top 10 technologies for 2026 is Odoo. And Odoo is a European-based ERP provider that's open source technology. And what this means for organizations is that it's a very modular, relatively low cost and easy to deploy technology. So unlike other monolithic ERP systems, it's a more flexible product that can be deployed in pieces, as a whole, or some mix and match variation of all the above. In addition, Odoo has a broad ecosystem. The partner community is very robust, and especially if you're in the small and mid-market, it can be a very viable product. It can also integrate really well with other systems. It has a lot of flexibility because it's open source, and it allows you to develop capabilities that you may not otherwise be able to create in some of the more rigid monolithic ERP systems that are out there. Now, scalability is one thing that's holding back Odoo at the moment. For now, it's very solid in the small and mid-market space, but if you're a larger, multinational, more global, complex organization, Odoo may not be able to scale up for that sort of growth and complexity. But for now, it's a good enough product that lands it at number 8 on our list of top 10 technologies for 2026. Coming in at number 7 on our list of top 10 enterprise technologies for 2026 is Infor Cloud Suite along with Infor Velocity. These are two different but very related products. Now, in the past, when we've looked at Infor, we've almost viewed their best of breed and industry-specific solution offering as somewhat of a liability, because it could be confusing to customers. There were multiple systems that needed to be patched together, and it just got a little messy for some organizations. But now, as time has gone on and we're entering 2026, it seems as though maybe Infor had it right all along, or at least was prepared for this movement that we're seeing right now in the marketplace, which is more organizations want that flexibility. They want that industry-focused solution, and they want that flexibility to be able to use the products in whatever ways they want. In years past, the Infor Cloud Suite has ranked pretty well in the top 10 ERP systems rankings, but I think Infor has an advantage as we enter the late 2020s in that it has a model that seems to support where the market is headed. Now, in addition to Infor Cloud Suite, you also have a product that they offer called Velocity, which is a front-end AI and integration tool that works not only with Infor Cloud Suite, but the great thing about it is it works with third-party products as well. So Infor is acknowledging that even Cloud Suite, as good as it is, alone isn't going to solve all your problems, and there's a high likelihood you're going to need other solutions to bolt on. And that's why they created Infor Velocity, and that flexibility really gives customers a lot of leeway to mix and match different technologies, which is a lot different than some of the other systems that try to lock you into being everything to everyone with that one system. Infor recognizes that that's not realistic, and instead what customers want is flexibility and innovation. So that all is enough to land Infor Cloud Suite at number 7 of our list of top 10 enterprise technologies. Coming in at number 6 on our list of top enterprise technologies for 2026 is Oracle NetSuite. And again, in the past, when we've done ERP-focused rankings, Oracle NetSuite has ranked very high. And even here, as we look to the broader enterprise technology space, Oracle NetSuite ranks high. Now, Oracle NetSuite, much like Odoo, is very good and well-suited for the small and mid-market. It's one of the original, if not the original, SaaS cloud offerings from ERP providers, which gives it a leg up and an advantage when it comes to innovation and some of the R&D dollars that have been invested in the product for the last 25 or more years. In terms of scale, ever since Oracle bought NetSuite over a decade ago, they've invested heavily in R&D, in the partner ecosystem, as well as its sales organization as well. So it's really allowed NetSuite to reach broader markets in different industries and different company sizes. Now, one thing I really like about what NetSuite is doing that they hadn't done in the past and that had been a liability in the past is that the product itself on the surface can be viewed as somewhat inflexible. Because it's a SaaS multi-tenant product, there's only so much change you can make to the software because you're sharing that same exact software with other organizations throughout the world that are using NetSuite. However, what they've done is they've opened up the market to third-party providers that can now go in and create industry-specific or functional-specific variations of NetSuite, but still using the NetSuite platform. One example is a company called Smart Factory. They have built a Industry 4.0 solution built for manufacturers on the NetSuite platform because NetSuite had historically been weak when it came to complex manufacturing. So this product now takes the NetSuite platform and extends it into other areas that it hadn't been so good at in the past. So even if NetSuite as a core vanilla product isn't a perfect fit for you, you might find that there's other third-party providers that have built solutions on the NetSuite platform that give you the best of both worlds. Now, the biggest disadvantage still is flexibility. It's still not as flexible of a product as a truly composable ERP offering and some of the other technologies in the space. But having said all that, that's still enough to land Oracle NetSuite at number 6 on our list of top 10 technologies for 2026. Coming in at number 5 on our list of top 10 enterprise technologies for 2026 is Microsoft Dynamics 365. Microsoft D365 has two variations of the product. One is Finance and Operations, or F&O as it's commonly called, and Business Central, or BC. And they're both considered D365, but for today's discussion, we're focused on F&O. And F&O is the enterprise-grade solution that provides a bit more flexibility, a bit more scale and innovation across multiple functions and industries. It's a solid tier 1 option. If you're considering SAP or Oracle, it can actually be a more flexible alternative to both SAP and Oracle Fusion. And it's got a very broad, robust partner ecosystem, which is mostly a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing too, because there's so many partners out there that it's hard to find good ones at times. There's some that aren't so good out there. But assuming you find the right partner, D365 can be a very effective solution for organizations. Now, it's not just Microsoft D365 on its own that lands it at number 5 in our ranking. It's a combination of having D365 in the Microsoft platform, the Microsoft ecosystem, to include things like Power Apps, Power BI, etc. And there's a ton of other solutions that can bolt on and work well with D365 that give you a lot of composable options, a lot of flexibility, a lot of business intelligence tools, AI tools, etc. So all that being said, that's enough to land Microsoft D365 at number 5 on our list of top 10 technologies for 2026. Coming in at number 4 on our list of top 10 enterprise technologies for 2026 is ServiceNow. And ServiceNow has historically been viewed as sort of an IT help desk ticket system or a service-based technology, which it still is, but it's expanded into a lot of different areas. Now it can be used for a number of different customer-facing workflows, employee-facing workflows, as well as internal IT workflows. In addition, there's a lot of AI investment that the company has made. It's scaled to some of the largest organizations in the world, and it's really developed a very robust ecosystem of partners and implementers that can support the product. One of the other areas of flexibility and innovation that puts ServiceNow at number 4 on our list is the number of integrations that it allows for. It's really created an open architecture and open platform that allows you to mix and match other types of technologies within the ServiceNow ecosystem. So again, it's not focused on locking you into one technology, but it can be a core technology that becomes sort of the backbone of your organization, supported by other technologies. So all this is enough to land ServiceNow at number 4 on our list of top technologies for 2026. Coming in at number 3 on our list of top technologies for 2026 is Salesforce. And Salesforce is not just a CRM system, and that's not why we're placing it here at number 3, but rather it's a platform. It's a true platform that provides a number of different technologies on that platform, and that's what puts Salesforce at number 3 on our list. Now, of course, many of you are probably using Salesforce for CRM, sales automation, customer service, etc., but you may not be as aware that there are a number of other third-party applications available on the Salesforce platform. So, for example, there are companies like Rootstock, which is a manufacturing-focused application that's built on the Salesforce platform. So if you're a manufacturer, you might deploy Salesforce not just as a CRM system, but as a CRM system that integrates to Rootstock, which is also on that Salesforce platform that allows you to do manufacturing. And Rootstock is just one of many examples, hundreds of different examples of third-party applications that have been built on this open Salesforce platform to give you flexibility and different options within that platform. Now, the flexibility of the product is mostly a strength, but it can also be a liability. If you don't manage the project well, if you don't put the right guardrails in place, it can actually turn into a bit of a mess. So you want to make sure you have good project governance, good oversight, clear vision of what you want out of the technology before you start going down the path of Salesforce. But having said all that, that's enough to land Salesforce at number 3 on our list of top technologies for 2026. Coming in at number 2 on our list of top enterprise technologies for 2026 is Palantir. And Palantir is another platform. It's not just an application, it's a platform that works well with other technologies. And it's meant for very complex operations, it's meant for complex business processes, and it's meant for complex technical environments. Palantir started off doing big, massive federal government sorts of implementations, so they know how to play nicely with old legacy systems and old data that needs to be cleaned up and systems that don't talk to one another but need to. And that's where Palantir thrives, is that they've created this whole niche of a big, scalable solution that isn't big and complex and risky like SAP or Oracle or some of the other bigger ERP providers in the space. But instead, what it does, it provides a big platform that allows you to tie together multiple systems. Now, it's not just an integration tool, it's also providing AI and workflows amongst those different systems. So now you've got AI accessibility at the front lines without having to work with the old legacy systems directly. Now, the one thing holding back Palantir is the fact that, yes, there are plenty of resources out there that can support it, but it's a very specialized niche. It's a very specialized skill set that can actually be hard to find the right resources. So that's one liability. The other thing is it is a complex product. So if you're not a larger organization, it may not make sense. And there's another system on our top 10 list that we have yet to get to that may be a better fit for you if you're a smaller organization. But having said all that, that's enough to land Palantir at number 2 on our list of top enterprise technologies for 2026. Coming in at number 1 on our list of enterprise technologies for 2026 is Snowflake. And this is a product that was nowhere to be found on our previous rankings because we focused on very focused categories like ERP, CRM, etc. But now that we're looking at the broader enterprise technology space, we rank Snowflake at number 1, largely because it supports so much of where the market is headed. It supports interoperability, it supports composability, it supports AI, integration, data governance, all the stuff we need from applications going forward is something that can be enabled by Snowflake. And Snowflake is a system that, much like Palantir, ties together multiple systems, is able to play nicely with multiple systems. It doesn't require you to rip out your back office systems in order to get value and better data and better decision making. Another thing that Snowflake does is allows you to start using AI without, again, having to replace all of your back office systems. It allows you to integrate data across different silos. It allows you to use AI. It allows you to create different workflows within the technology. And it's just a good composable option for organizations that are looking for the most amount of flexibility, the most amount of innovation, and trying to minimize their risk and cost at the same time. So think of Snowflake as a platform that provides connectors amongst different systems, as well as native applications within the Snowflake platform. So all that being said, that's why Snowflake is number 1 on our top 10 list of enterprise technologies for 2026. Now, I'd love to hear what you think. What do you think the best systems are? Where do you think the technology market is headed for 2026? What systems did I miss, or what technologies did I miss? What would you take off the list? I'd love to hear feedback below.
All right, so that was the top 10 list of top enterprise systems for 2026 and beyond. What are some of your thoughts from seeing that, Darian?
Yeah, I always love when you come out with your top 10 lists. They're super interesting to listen to for sure. And they always cause a lot of conversation for sure. So it's been fun to see that the last few days here. But yeah, I do definitely have some follow-up questions from this list. And I'm sure a lot of other people do too. So we'd love to hear from the audience. But a couple of my questions are, when should specifically a mid-market company choose Snowflake versus Palantir for interop or their AI layer?
Well, I'd say in general, generally speaking, Palantir is a bigger, heavier, more complex version of what Snowflake would do. So I think Snowflake is probably more, in general, this is a broad generalization, it's generally more suitable for mid-sized companies than a Palantir. Palantir sort of cut their teeth and was built for big government institutions, which is fine. That's great. So it can handle the complexities of a large organization. But with that complexity and robustness comes overkill potentially and a higher price tag. It's almost like comparing SAP to Microsoft D365. Yeah, SAP can handle the mid-market, but a lot of times we see that Microsoft D365 is a better fit for the mid-market just because it's more flexible, it's a bit lighter, it's not quite as big and complex and expensive as SAP. So I would almost, if I were to overgeneralize, I'd say consider Palantir like the SAP of that space, and Snowflake's probably more like the Microsoft D365.
For sure. And one last question with this is, what is the talent strategy here? Is it build versus buy for platform engineering and data governance?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And that's where it was difficult assembling this list, because if you have a build mentality versus a buy mentality or vice versa, you're going to completely change this list. And the top 10 list has a mix of platforms where you can do some building, but it also allows you to buy off the shelf, some apps within that platform. And so that's why, the Salesforces of the world and even NetSuite is headed in this direction, and others are too, where they're building not just an app or a set of applications themselves, they're building a platform that other third parties can build applications on. And in some cases, the customers themselves can build their own custom solutions in that same platform. So for those that want maybe the best of both worlds, or they're not fully committed to buy or build, the platform strategy, I think, is a pretty powerful one, and that's something that's fairly new in recent years here in the enterprise tech space.
Yeah, super interesting. But yeah, like I said, I would love to hear some more questions or comments on what the audience thought about the list and get some input there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, love to hear your comments. Drop them in the chat if you like it, you hate it, there's things you change or add or whatever. I'd love to hear your feedback. There's always plenty of conversation to go around, and there's no one answer for these top 10 lists. Even though we provided our view of what we think it should be, it's going to vary case to case. So I'd love to hear your feedback as well. So thanks for joining everyone here today. Darian, thanks for a great episode. Thank you to Mark Moffat from IFS for being here today, and also thanks for the audience for the great questions and for getting our content out there. Please, like this content, share it, comment, all that good stuff. It helps the algorithm. It helps it get the content out to more people. So be sure to let people know about the podcast that you think might benefit from it. We'd love to grow the audience as much as possible. So hope you all have a great week. We will see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.